remarkable eyes, and he hadn't been able to stop himself from responding. Oops! Such a small, inconsequential, even nonsensical word, yet given the context, his faintly taunting delivery, and her character, it had been tantamount to a red-rag invitation to pursue, to doggedly investigate his meaning until she'd uncovered all and had satisfied herself that she truly understood him and their marriage. He was confident that law would fix her interest unswervingly on him and allow him to lead her step by carefully judged step forward until she'd uncovered all he'd kept hidden. She would believe it more readily if she discovered it for herself, rather than through him trying to convince her of it. Such was his reasoning, albeit assembled after the fact. Reviewing the events of yesterday, he realized her comment regarding Christopher, having had the sense and the courage to seize love when he'd found it, had been merely the last straw that had tipped Devlin over the edge of the precipice on which he'd already been teetering. Therese had been the first of her generation of Cynsters to marry, and consequently, over the past 4 years, he and she had attended a string of Cynster weddings up and down the country. He and she were now one of a group of couples who regularly met at family events, such as Christopher and Ellen's wedding. When he'd embarked on his deception, he hadn't anticipated the impact that being surrounded by couples united in marriages based on openly acknowledged love would have on him, much less that it would rescript his view of what he wanted from his and Therese's marriage. More than anything else, viewing the contemporary Cynster marriages against the backdrop of those of the older Cynster generation had brought home to him that, as he and Therese would inevitably grow old, he wanted to grow old like that, in an openly loving relationship, in a marriage acknowledged as being based on reciprocated love. Although his change of heart and mind had happened prior to yesterday, he hadn't made any definite decision about how to correct Therese's belief. He'd been vacillating for months, and yesterday afternoon, his reckless inner self, having grown increasingly impatient to the point of revolt, had seized the opportunity and taken over his tongue, resulting in his uncharacteristically impulsive pseudo-revelation. Deep inside, he'd known he'd been dragging his heels for no valid reason, and his reckless self had resolved to act for his own good. Over the years, that had happened twice in business dealings, and in both instances, his inner self had been correct. His reticence over acting was a weakness of sorts, when he knew he should do something, but kept putting it off. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at Therese, letting his gaze linger on her features, currently relaxed in sleep. He'd said enough to engage her legendary inquisitiveness, then, aided by circumstance, had frustrated her every attempt to learn more immediately. Because they'd had their children with them, she declared that they wouldn't stay, even overnight, at her childhood home, Walkhurst Manor in Kent, given that the bridal couple had intended to retreat there, and the manor wasn't that large. Along with most of the Cynster couples attending, he, she, and the children had driven back to town, and because of the children, they'd been among the first to leave. They'd broken their journey to dine at Sevenoaks, then continued to London, arriving at Alverton House just before midnight. Courtesy of the children and the ever-present staff, Therese hadn't been able to question him regarding what she no doubt considered his inexplicable comments. And after settling the children, she and he had retired to their respective rooms. Then later, as he usually did, he joined her there, in her bed. In doing so, he'd made very sure that from the moment he'd walked through the door, she'd been sufficiently distracted to be unable to form